Morning. Oh, so good to see you all. Uh, we're about to begin our last class of this unit before we take a break for vacation. So, Shanko, if you would put up the prayers, although I think everyone knows by now, let's try to set motivation. It's not just ritual. You know, one might think if you go to the teachings of the Dalai Lama or the Ganden Tipa, the throne holder of the Gelugpa tradition, you might think that all these prayers at the beginning is just ritual, but they're meant to bring back a remembering consciousness very briefly of taking refuge in generating bodhicitta and requesting the guru to turn the wheel of dharma, which is one of the specific methods to overcome obstacles to receiving the teachings. Sangye chodang soki chogna dangju badu dagni kyapsu chi dagi chunen gipe sognam ki rola penchi sangye drupa sho. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. Through the collections I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all migrating beings. Sangye churang soki chognam la jangchu baru dagni kyapsu chi dagi chunyen gipe sognam ki drola penchir sangye drupa sho. And then having taken refuge generating bodhicitta, we offer a short mandala by offering this ground, anointed with perfume and strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, four continents, the sun and moon, visualized as a Buddha realm. May all migrators enjoy a pure realm. O holy and perfect Lama, from the clouds of compassion that form in the skies of your Dharmakaya wisdom, please send down, please release a rain of vast and profound Dharma, precisely in accordance with the needs of those to be tamed, to be trained. Actually, Sabkit Shukicha Abdu, so Idam Guru Rana Mandalakam Niryatayami. Okay, thank you. Good to see you. Hi, Anna. Hi, Paul. Even Jennifer, are you in France?
So we were both in France, and now we are in outside of London.
Oh, you're both okay. You're both overseas. Okay.
Yes, we're literally sitting across from each other in the table.
There you go. Dual visions. Okay, good to see you. And Cyril is also here. So we're going to begin again. This is our last session. We're going to begin with a little meditation to set our motivation. So if you'd like to sit comfortably. Relax your body, relax your mind. And as I said many times, relax your mind at the beginning means just to remind yourself. You don't have to think of anything else. You don't have to multitask as we're beginning to watch, for instance, being mindful of the breathing. Having recognized your breathing, hold it within mindfulness. Only recognizing when you're breathing in and breathing out, whether it was a long breath or a short breath. Particularly holding the endpoints. And if you'd like more of a challenge, keeping also in mind the number of respirations. although the actual sense that you'll be using to be mindful of the breathing is probably the tactile sense. It's your mental consciousness that's paying attention to that. So let go of any other interfering thoughts, grasping to yourself or grasping to your body. And if you've had a little success calming your mind, bring your attention to your mental consciousness, which is what you were using to watch the breathing, actually, through the interface of the tactile consciousness. It has no color or shape, so it's not dark if your eyes are partially closed. Let go of that dark appearance. In fact, let go of the appearances to your eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and body consciousness, like withdrawing the limbs of a tortoise into the shell. Some find it useful to think of that innermost shell being at the heart chakra. So bringing your attention there, knowing the contents of your mind, recognizing what's happening in there. Is there chatter? Thoughts of the past? Memories of the past? Plans for the future? Observations about the present? Various things popping into mind, going out? All within that conventional clear light nature of the mind. This clear light nature of the mind. Like space in that it does not obstruct. In this case, it does not obstruct the entry or reabsorption of events into the mental consciousness, from the mental consciousness into the mental consciousness, the same way that space does not obstruct physical objects. Remind yourself that we can reformat our hard drive. Well, used to say, Robert Thurman used to say hard drive, mental hard drive. Maybe now we say solid state drive. You can reformat your mind, which is not material. You can train it by introducing into it virtuous thoughts again and again so they become habitual, and eliminate negative thoughts, bad habits, anger, attachment, pride, jealousy, self-pity. not simply by not paying attention to them, but by applying their temporal antidotes of those negative minds. That should be our daily practice all day long, being vigilant of our mind stream in whatever we do. Whenever these kind of problematic minds arise, like a guard to the king's palace, we should confront them first of all. And if they don't immediately recede, we should avert them, take our spear down, use the antidotes to overcome them. We can find real peace of mind, Dharma peace of mind this lifetime that way. And the fact that we can recognize this is due to this auspicious moment of a life of leisure and endowment, within which we can, if we turn our attention away from simply the appearances of this lifetime, we can plan ahead for future lives as a person of beginning scope, avoiding negative actions, creating virtue to be born in the upper realms next life, as a person of intermediate scope, recognizing that would not be sufficient because we would still be within cyclic existence, and working to achieve liberation, nirvana, through application of the three higher trainings, higher training of morality, concentration, and wisdom. Or if we have the fortune to have heard the Buddhist teachings, where he mentioned to his disciples, those of intelligence and of higher aspiration, they shouldn't be satisfied with his own lesser vehicle teachings. Don't stop there, but to aim for enlightenment, to develop bodhicitta through the Mahayana, the entryway to the Mahayana path. Bodhicitta is a thought that observes the suffering of all sentient beings, all sufferings, suffering of suffering, changeable suffering, all pervasive suffering, even what looks like incredible luxury of the gods or the humans, or the sort of indescribable calm of the form and formless realm gods. Still not experiencing necessarily pleasure or changeable suffering, but experiencing all pervasive suffering. Taking that into observation, recognizing that they have all been our mothers, and depthlessly kind as our present mother has been through numberless lifetimes, feeling affinity with them, wanting to relieve their suffering, generating not only heartwarming love, but great compassion that wants to alleviate their suffering. And even the exceptional thought, laksam, that thinks, I myself must do that. In order to achieve enlightenment that can eliminate their suffering, it's not enough just to have the wish. We have to engage in the Bodhisattva's deeds, particularly from our point of view, accumulating the two collections of merit and wisdom. Merit means virtuous karma and so forth. Collection of wisdom means continued insight into emptiness. To do that, collect those two collections, accumulate those two collections, we need to know the methods that are explained in the Prajnaparamita Sutras, explained further by Nagarjuna and explicated by Chandrakirti and his Madhyamaka. And we're fortunate to receive the oral transmission of Lama Tsongkhapa's analysis of those texts and filling in the details with more accessible explanation. I think I'm going to participate today in our last class of this unit in order to achieve enlightenment ultimately for the sake of sentient beings through listening, contemplating, and meditating on the material in order to accumulate these two collections. I'm going to take part in the class in order to become enlightened for the sake of all sentient beings. Okay, thank you. Good to see you. Louise has arrived. KT's here.
John Campbell says he's driving home and he'll be a little late, but he will join us.
Right. I sent him a reminder. He took his son out for camping this weekend. He's coming back home. Thank you. So I think I mentioned to you this incident that was very moving for me with my teacher, Lama Yeshe, my root guru, Lama Yeshe. When we were at Instituto Lama Tsongkhapa, I was his attendant. We were both in this little building called the Villeta. I don't know if anyone's ever been to Instituto Lama Tsongkhapa. It's where the resident geshe usually lives, but in the basement, there's another apartment, which was usually reserved for the visiting teachers. So I was down there when Lama was teaching. I think he was teaching the 6 yogas of Naropa course, this incredible course. It's so amazing. And hi, John. He was outside standing, looking at the fields outside. As Italy, we're next to the farms. He had his hands behind his back, clasped behind his back, just like looking there. And I came next to him. I was standing there too. We were looking out. He was talking to me like I was just one of his buddies, and he said, George, I wonder sometime, where would we be now if we hadn't met the Dharma? And I thought, wow, if I hadn't met the Dharma, I would be a mess. The Dharma is what has been able to guide me in so many ways. And, thinking like that, think when you see the people on the bus or in the city or on the roads in your hometown, in the office, that haven't met the Dharma. And you can feel that, a very deep kind of compassion for them in that regard. So one of the important precepts of the mind training is to always use all of the events of your everyday life to enhance the 2 bodhicittas. So that what that means is, of course, conventional bodhicitta, based on compassion, affection, and compassion for sentient beings, being patient and so forth, and ultimate bodhicitta within the sphere of conventional bodhicitta, having conventional bodhicitta in your mind, the wisdom that realizes emptiness. So the wisdom that realizes emptiness of the Shravakas and Pratika Buddhas of the Hinayana is not considered ultimate bodhicitta because they don't have within their mind stream conventional bodhicitta. Their mind stream is not held by conventional bodhicitta. So within the sphere of the ultimate bodhicitta, there are a couple of verses in Lama Chopa at the end of the invocation of the a tree of assembled gurus. You go, there's Lama Tsongkhapa sitting in the middle and surrounded by deities, and then the various levels of tantra, and then the bodhisattvas and the Pratika Buddhas, a line of the Pratika Buddhas, the Shravakas, the Dakas and Dakinis, and so forth. And after imagine inviting them and them becoming one, through your invocation of those beings, even the Shravakas and Pratika Buddhas who you imagine as being already enlightened, having absorbed into their images in your visualization, in preparation of making offerings and so forth, you say, Chunam Rangshin Droong Kundel Yang. So, although all phenomena are devoid of coming and going, so that's very relevant to our own exploration of emptiness here. We've realized not only is the self empty of inherent existence, and outer phenomena are empty of inherent existence, but other phenomena, everything that we experience, processes like coming and going, are also devoid of inherent existence. So a very similar verse comes in the verse further on in the Seven Limbs, the verse of rejoicing. The Chunam Rangshin starts out the same thing. Chunam Rangshin Sema Dangdel Yang. Although all phenomena are devoid of characteristics, characteristic existence, although all phenomena are empty of inherent existence, still I can rejoice in the dreamlike virtues of ordinary and Arya beings. Even though they're dreamlike, even though they don't exist inherently, they still exist conventionally and are subjects suitable to be rejoiced in the creation of those virtues. So just a little advice for the coming break time. We have about 5 weeks after this teaching today. One of my friends at Deer Park, who's been listening to the teachings there, sent me the link to a YouTube channel for the Ganden Tipa. Do you know what that means, the Ganden Tipa? Ganden is what the Gelugpa tradition used to be called. The Ganden was the name of the monastery, the first monastery that Lama Tsongkhapa made. But the Ganden Tipa is a throne holder of the Gelugpa tradition. And he was a disciple of Lama, of Geshe Zopa, and taught he attended all of Geshe Zopa's courses, like a disciple, sitting with us. He had a more elevated position than us, of course. But he also taught sometimes when Geshe couldn't teach, and then when Geshe passed away, he began teaching the summer courses. So there are all of the summer courses that he taught at Deer Park up there with incredibly good translations. Doris, I think, will post that up, and it's already posted in the chat if you'd like to see that link. Also, there is a PDF that was suggested to me by Mikhail, who's always, doing a lot of study. He found found it very beneficial from the glossary of one of Geshe Zopa's texts, talking about the direct and about contradictions and so forth. So that's also posted up there. It says Geshe Zopa glossary entries or something like that. So I was able to make that into a PDF. So thanks to Mikhail's study, he found that useful. So you might find that useful. And then also today we'll be talking about, a little bit later on, we'll be talking about a section from the Two Truths text by Guy Newland. Can you see that? It looks clear on my screen, yeah. That Jeffrey Hopkins mentioned. So we'll get to that, and so that will be relevant. So for your own study, I guess Jeffrey Hopkins mentioned that a certain page in Guy Newland's book would be relevant. Turns out I think Jeffrey had the wrong pages, but anyway, we'll see. So before we begin, how are we doing? Anyone have any questions? Any Dharma itches? I think Doris does, but I was going to ask Don if he did. He was scratching his neck there. Was that a Dharma itch?
No, sorry, I was giving a
thumbs up.
non-verbal answer to someone.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I have a question since I missed last week of what pages we're on.
Okay, can someone help? We're at the section that says distinctions within conventional truth from the perspective of the world.
Page 229 in Jimba, I believe.
And in
Hopkins, page 226, I believe.
226. Thank you.
Which is
Thank
page
you.
12, number page 12 in our PDF.
Okay, excellent. So does anyone else have any questions from last time? Richard, have you had a chance to catch up? Are there any lingering questions?
No questions, but I finished catching up approximately 3 minutes before class, but I did catch up.
Okay, that's okay. That's legitimate. Okay, good. So I mentioned last time that we would start here, distinctions within conventional truth from the perspective of the world. But as usual, just to see where we are, what's the reason we're investigating the two truths here? It's because Nagarjuna's fundamental wisdom mentioned that the bodhisattvas enter into the fifth ground and the sixth ground with special understanding of the 10 equalities, the first of which is that they're all equal in impermanent phenomena, are all equal in being not inherently produced. So the famous, which we have gone through, that phenomena are not produced from an inherently, are not produced from self, from other, from both self and other, nor causelessly. So we've gone through the first two. We're still on the first two, and having refuted other generation from other, that is to say that the sprout is inherently other than the seed, still some non-Buddhists or even some Buddhists might say there's no need for so much reasoning, logic, and so forth. It's obvious in conventional, to the world. It's obvious to the world that things are produced from others. So why do you wise guys, you philosophers, you Prasangikas, why are you pressing all of these logical reasonings with the wisdom of your fire burning up our arguments of, other generation? Leave those arguments aside. It's just accepted by the world. So that's the point where we are at here. So so on just a little before the outline we're going to begin, on either that same page or just before that, it says this point should be understood in the context of all other examples of direct opposites. And what point is that? Those two things of which one does not exist if one is not established through positive determination, when its opposite is eliminated through negative determination, mutually exclude each other. So this is talking about mutual exclusion and direct opposites and so forth. So the PDF that Mikhail had suggested glossary items, you might find that useful in studying this again. So going back, this point should be understood in the context of all other examples of direct opposites. Now, if an example of direct opposites that excludes the possibility of a third term cannot be shown, there will then be no facility to engage in refutations based on critical analysis, where the possibilities are confined to binary terms, inquiring whether something does or does not exist, whether it is one or many, and so on. We went over that last time, just to remind you. So if you couldn't limit it to just two things, existent or, existed or non-existent and so forth, you would be very limited. But if there do exist such examples of direct opposites, two things that are direct opposite, like say conventional truth and ultimate truth, right? When one of the terms within that direct opposition is negated, if the other is not established, then the other term has no existence, does not exist. Does that make sense? We talked before. Therefore, to say that there is no direct opposites according to Prasangika, Madhyamaka suggests a failure to become versed in the ways of refutation and affirmation, insofar as when one term in a direct opposition is eliminated, the other comes to be established, and when one is negated, the other is affirmed. If it's not a conventional truth, it has to be an ultimate truth, and so forth. There is no difference between Prasangika, Svatantrika, and Madhyamaka. Okay, so just to remind you, John, yeah.
Just in referring back to last class where brought up this term, the law of the excluded middle. Is this an example? My understanding is that this is an example of the law of the excluded middle. There is no third alternative. Is that correct?
I believe so. So someone who's more versed in the use of that terminology, which is mainly Buddhism itself, doesn't talk about the law of the excluded middle, other than translators and philosophers who write about it, calling upon that term from Western philosophy, whether it be Greek or whatever. Who can explain what very briefly, just again, what the law of excluded middle is? Paul, had you offered a definition before?
I may have, but if so, I've forgotten.
Richard, is that something that you studied in philosophy, the law of the excluded middle?
Well, I just happen to have the Wikipedia page here. And it says the law of the excluded middle states that for every proposition, either this proposition or its negative or its negation is true. I don't know if you can hear me over my dog.
Yes. So yeah, I think that's it. Basically, it's saying what John is asking about is basically talking about direct opposites, that if something are mutually exclusive like that. Cyril, do you have a question?
Yes, please, Venerable George. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. I have one question concerning ultimate and conventional truth.
Yeah.
So there are opposites, because one is without change. One is steady and the other is changing. So they are not, they are opposites, kind of opposites.
One is not necessarily changing. Conventional truth is not necessarily changing. For instance, uncompounded space. that's a conventional truth. That's permanent.
Yes.
So it's
Yes.
not on the basis that one is permanent and one is unchanging, as that one is emptiness, non-inherent
Yes.
existence, and the other is conventional existence. Okay, but go on. Yeah.
Yes. So if I have understood well the previous session, they are mutually exclusive.
Yes.
So I would like to know if both exist.
If both,
How
say again.
both truths exist.
Yes.
Both. So how do you relate the two truths?
How do you relate the true truth? So that's what we're talking about. That's what we've been alluding to and talking about. So the two truths, they are different entities. In Tibetan, we say ngo. So if it is one, it is not the other. They're mutually exclusive like that. But those two entities are existent in every phenomena. Say a sprout. A sprout has the entity of its ultimate truth, and it has an entity of its conventional truth. And those two are inseparable. That is to say, they form a kind of a philosophical idea that the Tibetans translated as ngo chikla, what is it? Dokpa tade. So they are one entity. They themselves, although they are different entities, they form one entity themselves in the sense that they're both present, but they are different intellectually conceivable. So when you conceive of one, you are not conceiving of the other. So we're going to continue more about that. So thanks for that question, Cyril. Let's continue on here. So this section.
Thank you, Vinam.
Yeah, Cyril, where are you?
Yes, can you hear me?
Where are you? Where are you right now?
I'm in a park. Sorry if there is noise.
Okay. Well,
In a park, yeah. Sorry.
Okay. Excellent. So this section, distinctions within conventional truth from the perspective of the world. So Jimpa's translation starts, of the two, objects and subjects, I'd read this last time, but didn't really talk about it so much. Of the two, objects and subjects within conventional truth, to state that the class of subjects includes, from the perspectives of worldly cognition, both those that are veridical and those that are distorted. The text says in verse 624. So I was kind of skeptical of veridical, but thanks to Rocio, who's not here yet, she reminded me that veridical sounded like the Spanish word veridad, and then I thought, of course, veritas is, what is veritas? Is that Latin or Greek?
Latin.
Latin, truth in many of your college mottos or something like that. Maybe the government has it, but sometimes that's debatable. So I'm warming up to veridical for the translation there. So what is he talking about here? If you talk about all phenomena, and one way, as I give this analogy, sometimes like a pizza, you can cut it up different ways. You can cut it into triangles or squares or whatever. You can cut up all phenomena into various ways. Here you could cut it up into subjects and objects. Is there any phenomena that doesn't fall into those two categories? David, what do you think?
Would you repeat that again, please? I didn't understand the question.
Is there any phenomena among all the phenomena that exist that is not either a subject or an object? David, what do you think?
I would say no. Though I'd probably be wrong.
You'd probably be right in this case. So all phenomena are either subjects or objects. In fact, some phenomena are both subjects and objects, right? Anyway, you think about that. So of the two, objects and subjects within conventional truth, if you were to state that the class of subjects includes both those that are true and those that are distorted from the perspective of worldly cognition, this verse is given. So the verse 624, false vision is also said to be of two kinds. So why is that saying also? Because the verse 23, you have to go back. Well, okay, I can't find it. 23 must have been talking about correct vision. But anyway, here, this verse is saying, false vision is also said to be of two kinds. That of clear senses. So when we say false vision, we're talking about vision of conventional reality, because we're observing falsities, things that exist conventionally and the world accepts as true, but are not really true. So false vision is also said to be two kinds. That of clear senses, so ordinary people, if their senses are unimpaired by any kinds of internal or external faults, that are said to be clear senses, and that of impaired senses. Cognitions deriving from impaired senses are said to be distorted compared to those of the unimpaired. So the world says, that seeing the horns of, let's say, what was a common example, seeing a mirage, and which appears as water. Cognitions derived from impaired senses are held to be distorted compared to those of the unimpaired. Okay, so that's what we talked about. We just read that last time. Jeffrey Hopkins' translation says, also, those that perceive falsities are asserted to be of two types, those with clear sense powers and those having defective sense powers. Consciousnesses of those having defective sense powers are asserted to be wrong in relation to those having good sense powers. So within the world, ordinary world, if someone has distorted sight and because of having eaten some fruit, like some fruit called thorn apple. Has anyone who's been in India, John or Paul or anyone who's been in India, ever had thorn apple? I can't remember.
It's also called datura.
Yeah, right.
And it's like a poison if you take too much.
Right.
And apparently if you take just a little bit, it's a hallucinogen, I think.
Yeah.
Right. So the text implies later, we're coming to it, comes that you would see things as yellow. So someone whose senses are impaired because of that, they would say, those people with unimpaired who hadn't eaten datura or thorn apple, they would say that that other person's eyesight is distorted, okay, incorrect, and so forth. Okay, so continuing the commentary to that verse, Lama Tsongkhapa says, not only is the class of knowable objects, differentiated into two truths, false vision all nobles are either one truth or the other, right? Divided. False vision in the case of subjective mind is also said to be of two kinds. So when we're
sorry,
talking about
I'm sorry, Venerable George, where are you reading from?
I'm reading Jimpa's text, starting
Okay.
with his commentary right after verse 624.
Oh, gotcha.
Okay.
I lost my page. Thank you.
Like the
Not only is the
last
class of-
5 lines in page 229.
Yeah. Thank you. In Jeffrey's, what's that? 229?
In Jinpa, page 229, the last 5 lines, right?
Yeah,
Oh, okay. Right.
got it.
Got it. Okay. Not only is a class of knowable objects differentiated into two truths. So all knowables are either true or false. In the case of subjective mind, in the case of minds which are subjects, because we just talked about dividing things into subject and object, mind is also said to be of two kinds. So subject minds can be true, veridical, and those that are distorted, or as Jeffrey says, right and wrong. Jeffrey says, not only objects of knowledge divided into the two truths, but also subjects perceiving falsities. So that's how we're talking about perceiving conventionalities, right? Falsities. They are asserted as twofold, right and wrong, or as Jimpa says, veridical and those that are distorted. They are that of clear senses, untainted by temporary conditions of illusion. That's talking about the veridical or the right vision, and cognitions based on and cognitions based on them, and that of impaired senses, talking about the wrong vision or distorted vision, that of impaired senses, subjects tainted but temporarily by conditions of illusion. Of these, conditions deriving from tainted senses are said to be distorted compared to those of the unimpaired. Making sense so far, right? Of these, cognitions deriving from tainted senses are said to be distorted compared to those of the unimpaired, conditions untainted by temporary conditions of illusion. Cognitions untainted by temporary conditions of illusion. The former, that is to say, cognitions of clear senses, are accepted to apprehend the objects without distortion. So if your senses are not impaired in some way, you can have an impaired hearing, you can have impaired sense of smell, you can have impaired taste. You don't hear, you can hear maybe sometimes, depending on the food you eat, your smell and taste can be affected. But as you grow older, those senses can become impaired, so they can't give accurate. If you ask someone my age or older if something is sweet or sour, they may not give you the right answer because their sense is impaired because of age in this case. The former, cognitions of clear senses, are accepted to apprehend objects without distortion. This distinction between the two is drawn not from the Madhyamaka's own standpoint, but from the perspective of the everyday world. So that's to say, from Madhyamaka point of view, the objects of the world, let's say the conventionalities, conventional truths, there are not these two divisions of those objects being perceived by clear senses and tainted senses. They're all wrong. They're not truths because although they appear to be inherently existent, they're actually devoid of inherent existence. And so their mode of appearance doesn't coincide with their mode of existence, how they actually exist. Okay, so more or less what we've talked about before, but taking from a slightly different angle. Jimpa's translation continues. just as the class of subjective cognition is differentiated in terms of distorted and undistorted, this is true for the class of objects as well. So, how did we say here? Jeffrey translates that as Chandrakirti. This is on page 227. No, yeah, 227. Chandrakirti indicates that just as subjects are divided into two, distorted and undistorted, erroneous and non-erroneous, so objects are also. So the Tibetan, for those who are following the Tibetan, this is Yulchen la Chinchi lok malok nisu chewad. So here he's using another term rather than what we was talking about before, Yangdak and Lokpa. Now he's using Chinchi lok and Chinchi malokpa. What does that mean? Chinchi lok and Chinchi malokpa, what does that mean? Does anyone know? John, do you know? Oh, wait, did John disappear?
I think we
Oh.
lost him. Oh,
Oh.
I guess we did.
Mikhail, what does Chinchi lok and Chinchi malok mean?
Wrong and not wrong.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, as Jeffrey says, erroneous and non-erroneous, or what did Jippa say here? Distorted and undistorted. Yeah, okay. So now we get to this next verse, 625. So this is, again, Chandrakirti's Karikas, right? Everything that the six unimpaired senses grasp. Unimpaired senses means they don't have a source of error. Everything that they grasp and perceive within everyday experience of the world, so we're talking about conventionalities now, is true from the perspective of the world. That's considered a convention, people would say that's true. The rest, the world itself defines as false. So those things that are not perceived with unimpaired senses, everything that the six unimpaired senses grasp and perceive within everyday experience of the world is true from the perspective of the world. The rest the world defines as false. So Jeffrey translates that with some commentary added in, although Jimpa will give some commentary later. So let me just read what Jeffrey translated that. Objects realized by the world that are apprehended by the consciousnesses, there are some brackets in here if you're looking at it, of the six senses unimpaired, meaning what? Unimpaired by superficial causes of mistake. All of those objects realized by them are true or real, just relative to the world, because of being phenomena that prior to realizing emptiness cannot be realized to be a combination of appearing to be inherently existent, but being empty of such. Did you follow that? The parenthetical, is that a parentheses? Bracketed phrase. Because of being phenomena that prior to realizing emptiness, we're looking at conventional phenomena. Prior to realizing emptiness, they can't be realized to be a combination of something that is appearing to be inherently existent, but is actually empty of that. So therefore, they are true only relative to the world, not to the Arya beings, just to the worldly beings. The rest, and then this is important, Jeffrey has in bracket here, the rest, that is to say, those apprehended by those objects apprehended by sense consciousnesses impaired by superficial causes of mistake, such as reflections, echoes, and so forth, and end bracket, are posited as unreal, again, just relative to the world. So we're getting here this discussion of, you know, when we say what is true and false in the world, you know, some object that appears to be one way and is something different for the world. How are we doing? Are we following along? Making sense? Then the commentary in Jimba's translation to that verse starts, everything that the six unimpaired senses grasp, senses unimpaired by temporary conditions of illusion, comma, and that those senses perceive within everyday experience of the world. This is true or veridical within the framework of or from the perspective of the world. As Jeffrey translates, objects realized by the world that are apprehended by the consciousnesses of the six senses, the six sense powers. So what does that mean? Each of the six senses has its own sense power. So objects realized by the world that are apprehended by the consciousnesses of the six sense powers that are unimpaired by superficial causes of mistake. So the implication is that where the temporary causes of mistake occur are in the sense powers, in the sense faculties, in the eye sense faculty, the ear sense faculty, nose, taste, touch, or in the mental sense faculty, which would mean the mental consciousness. Okay. Objects realized by the world that are apprehended by the consciousnesses of the six sense powers, unimpaired by superficial causes of mistake, are true. That is real from just, or his footnote B says ni. That's like when we say tong pa ni, or the syllable ni is sometimes atta, sometimes it just means mere, just that. So it's just from the world, that is to say, only from the world, or as the Tibetan says, kona, only from the viewpoint of the world. It is not that those objects are posited as true and real in relation to an Arya being, a superior being, someone who's realized emptiness. Someone who's realized emptiness would not say that those would not posit them as being true. Neither of the one that the world calls true, the Arya would not say is true, because it doesn't exist the way that it appears. It appears to be inherently existent, whereas it's not. Here, superior, or Arya, and middle way system, in the last sentence of the previous paragraph, have similar meanings. Okay. So Jimpa's text said here, the two phrases from the perspective of the Aryas and from the Madhyamaka standpoint share the same meaning. Continuing in Jimpa, the rest, so when it's talking about those things perceived by impaired senses, so not everything that's seen by impaired senses fall into this, but some things do. Okay. We'll mention that in a second. The rest, such as mirror images and so on, which are perceived as objects when the senses are impaired, the world itself defines as false. The term itself, quote unquote, when it says the world itself defines as false, here suggests that to establish these cognitions as deluded, valid conventional cognition alone is adequate. There is no need to seek recourse in rational cognition inquiring into suchness, what we would often translate as reasoning consciousness, which means something that is delving into searching for a truly existent or inherently existent object. Well, it sounds complicated, right? But it's not that bad. What do you think? Nadine, are you following?
Thank you very much. Valid conventional cognition. Is this a word for, which means Brahmana?
Say again?
Valid conventional cognition. Does it refer to Brahmana?
Pramana, sema.
Sema, yeah. I think so. Yeah. I don't have the Tibetan of that term right here, but when we're talking about valid conventional cognition, so that valid cognition is usually tsema or pramana. So that means how many kinds of valid cognitions are there? Nadine, do you know?
Direct and indirect. Direct or conceptual.
Conceptual, right?
And then also conventional and ultimate, isn't it? I don't clearly remember it. Conventional and ultimate. Ultimate common.
Right. Well, but when we talk about pramana in general, when we say something is a valid cognition, pramana can be also applied to persons. Like the Buddha is also pramana. And in the praises of Vajrayogini, the Dakinis, it says the Dakinis are valid, their proclamations are valid, and their samayas are also valid. They're all pramana. So pramana can be used in various ways, but usually when we say pramana, we're talking about valid cognitions. So valid cognitions are of two types. Direct valid cognitions, like say the senses, and you don't need logic there, and inferential valid cognition where you do need logic. Richard, what do you think?
Venerable, I just wanted to, I'm a little unclear on exactly what's meant by object in this context. Is what's meant a construction of the mind or something else?
It can be. That's something we're going to investigate. So here, Jimpa's translation, the rest, such as mirror images and so forth, which are perceived as objects. Now, generally, in Buddhism, say in Madhyamika, object is a synonym of phenomena. So that means it exists, right? The rest, such as mirror images and so forth, which are perceived as objects, that doesn't mean that they are objects, that they actually exist. Well, from one point of view, do reflections in a mirror exist?
Well, yes, they do, but there is a reflection in the mirror, but what the reflection refers to exists, but the reflection itself is, and I guess you could call an illusion of a certain sort.
I would put it the opposite way. What the reflection refers to doesn't exist. It refers to a real face. Seems like it's a real face. But the reflection itself is a knowable object. It's something you can see, you can perceive.
Yeah.
The rest, let me just finish. The rest, such as mirror images and so forth, which are perceived as objects when the senses are impaired, the world itself defines as false. So there's a lot to unpack there. Let me read what Jeffrey says. The rest, that is to say, reflections and so forth, which appear as objects when the sense powers are impaired, are posited as being unreal in relation to the world. Continue reading Jeffrey. The word just indicates that just a conventional valid cognition is sufficient to posit those consciousnesses as mistaken, such, that is to say, that the same thing does not rely on a rational consciousness, or realizing emptiness, or reasoning consciousness. The word just indicates that just a conventional valid cognition is sufficient to posit those consciousnesses as mistaken. Okay. There's a lot to unpack there. What do you think? Anna, are you following? Yeah, we can't hear you. You're muted.
I'm following. Thank you, Venerable George. Again, just making sure I don't get tripped over the terminology.
Okay. Trying to follow. Okay. Paul, is it making sense? You've studied this before, so
Yeah. No, it makes sense. I mean, it's, and I think that's, you were asking what that term was, or someone was asking what the term was for conventional cognition, a valid conventional cognition. I think it's the Tanyebe Tsema. So what we would call conventional valid cognition, right?
So Tanyeba is another one of the synonyms of samvriti, which here is being used in the sense of ordinary conventional usage, verbal designation, and so forth. The term itself here suggests that to establish these cognitions is deluded, to say that someone who's ingested dadara or has jaundice and sees everything kind of with a yellow glow on it, to establish that those cognitions are deluded, it's sufficient, it's adequate to use valid conventional cognition alone, just that. You don't need you don't need at all inquiry into emptiness. Inquiry, reasoning consciousness inquiring into whether those things existed inherently would show that they're false, but you don't need that. They're false ultimately, but simply on the conventional level. Cyril, you have another observation, another question.
Yes, I concerning valid connection, which can be direct eventually. For example, direct mental perception. So it is something that is existing.
Yes.
Or has existed. So you cannot. So it's okay. That was so concerning, for example, mental perception. Can it also be visual perception?
Yeah.
And invalid.
So, for instance, as someone who with unimpaired senses sees the white wall as white, and someone who has jaundice or has eaten dadara or something like that, I'll ask you in a minute whether in Nepal there's dadara or thornel. So someone comes in, what, say again?
It's datura.
Datura, sorry. Did I pronounce incorrectly? The person whose senses are impaired, their eye sense is impaired by having eaten that substance, sees the wall as yellow, but that can be overturned that can be, what does it say? That can be shown to be incorrect by the valid visual cognition of the person with unimpaired eyesight. They say, come on, that's white. And of course, they could argue then. I'm sure there'll be some people talking about equality and so forth and so on. Who's to say your opinion that it's white is better than my opinion that it's yellow? Okay. So does that exist in Nepal, Cyril? Dadra or Datura?
Sorry, I do not know the word.
Okay.
So datura is a plant that has that it can be poisonous and has hallucinogenic properties.
Okay. And okay, so what about, for example, if, for example, I can have some visual mental perception, some like some visualization of some for example, someone or something like that. So it's I mean, there is no, if it is valid and if it is direct, so it means you can see, for example, something that has happened in the past.
Okay, I'm not following exactly. So what I would suggest, Cyril, if you have some questions, you can email them to me. That way you have a chance of composing your question more, over time, so you don't have to worry about trying to compose it just online right now. Jennifer, what do you think?
Yes, thank you, Venerable George. That brings up a question, even within the realm of conventional valid cognition, the term valid versus, the term maybe like dominant or ubiquitous. So for instance, in the case of colorblindedness, most people can, perceive a certain range of colors, and those who are colorblind have maybe faulty genetics relating to the cones in the eye. But then on the other hand of the spectrum, there are certain people who can see like 100 million colors. They see many more colors than the average person. And there's a term for that. So it gets me thinking about, is valid really the right term within a conventional sense, or is it really more like predominant based on sort of the proportion of people that see the world in a certain way?
So, yeah, right. So interesting pathway to go down. Many years ago, there was a book written by a psychologist or psychiatrist called The Myth of Mental Illness. Thomas Snaz, I think it was. So you can ask similar kind of questions, who's to say this person is mentally ill? Is that to say that his or her perceptions and way of thinking is invalid? So it depends upon the consensus of the world. Okay, perhaps in a world where everyone had some kind of genetic change, so that they couldn't see white, they only saw yellow. There would be a question like that, but that's another discussion. That's something you can think about in discussion group and so forth, and follow on. Maybe we can go back to it in the future. Let's go a little bit further here. So it's basically saying that for the world to decide whether something is true or false, the perceptions of someone are to be believed or not, whether they have distorted or undistorted senses, you don't need to use an analysis, an ultimate analysis. It's sufficient to have just a conventional analysis using valid conventional valid cognition. Okay, so Jimpa's translation continues. The conditions that impair the senses from within. So there are different kinds of impairment of the senses. Some can be due to something that's outside and something that's inside. The conditions that impair the senses from within refer to cataracts, which I've had. I don't know if any of you had. That impairs the senses. You can't see clearly. Having yellowish vision, maybe because of, having, what's it called, jaundice and so forth. Eating datura fruit, and so on. And that, let's see, did Jimba say there? So Jeffrey says about that, internal conditions that impair the sense powers are cataracts. Tibetan says rabrip, usually rabrip. Rabrip sometimes can mean the appearance of falling hair. Rabrip in general means distorted vision. So sometimes it's mistranslated, that kind of distorted vision of seeing floaters is sometimes called rabrip. But here it means cataracts. Jaundice, mixer. So Jimpa had translated mixer as yellowish vision. So in Tibetan, mixer, yellow eye, can just mean jaundice. Okay, internal conditions that impair the sense powers are cataracts, jaundice, and so forth, as well as having eaten dadura. So there he translates it as, he puts the phonetics as dadura, not datura, and so forth. Dadura is thorn apple. The Tibetan term for thorn apple is hangtom. When its fruit has been eaten, all appears to be golden, and so forth. And so forth includes contagion and the like. So if you've come down with some fever or something like that, Jimpa says the phrase and so on includes disease epidemics, among other things. So Jimpa's translation above said, Datura is a resin plant, and when its fruit is consumed, everything appears golden. So it's unclear whether there's some of you who are more conversant with hallucinogenics. So any kind of hallucinogenic, whether it would be mushrooms from South America. I think in some of the ceremonies you've participated in, Sean, I hope you're not eating a mushroom right now. Some of the ceremonies you participated in, there's some kind of plants, either mushrooms or other things that are ingested for hallucinogenic effect.
Ayahuasca
Tradition, and so forth. So also ingesting, smoking marijuana or eating marijuana or hashish and so forth, all of those can cause certain kind of inner distortion of the senses. The conditions that impair the senses from outside, external sources of impairment of the senses, are such things as mirrors. So you might say, that seems strange, like that's an impairment of the eye. When we studied low rig earlier, we said that even traveling in a boat, it says in the text, is a source of an external source of error. So it looks like everything is moving past you. Einstein would have a little trouble with this because they're both relative, right? Whether you're moving or the surroundings are moving. If you're at a train and it looks like everything is moving past you quickly, that's said to be an external source of error. The conditions that impair the senses from without, I mean, outside, exterior, are mirrors, cave acoustics, being in a cave, hearing echoes and so forth, bright colored sand when struck by spring sun, and so on. Or as Jeffrey translates that, external conditions that impair the sense powers are mirrors, sound spoken within caves. So have you all seen something in the movies, or if you've experienced in Washington someplace where you could stand and someone the other side of the room whispering you can hear very well? It's kind of like that, right? It could be distortions because of caves and other things. And then the thing about the sand that Jimpa translated as sand, mirrors, sound spoken within caves, the rays of the summer sun being proximate to white sand and so forth, even though there might be no internal conditions impairing the senses, those external sources of error serve as causes for apprehending, respectively, reflections, echoes, water in mirages. So that's talking about the sun hitting the white sand. You know, actually, it's not because of hitting the white sand. Anyway, well, you'll those of you who know how mirages form, it's not so much because of the sand itself. Those are causes for apprehending, respectively, reflections, that is mirrors, echoes, the caves and so forth, waters and mirages and so forth. Mantras and medicines used by magicians and so forth also should be understood similarly as causes of external causes of mistake. Whereas Jimpa says, one should also understand this class of external conditions of illusion to include the spells and relevant substances prepared by magicians. So you remember when we talked about the analogies within the Svatantrika system of the magician's illusion. So the spell that would be put on the participants, hypnotic trance perhaps, and a certain substance that has blessed, that has been affected by mantra and so forth, whether it be a pebble or a piece of wood and so forth. We talked about that before. Those are also considered external sources of error. Paul, what do you think?
I was just curious if you need to take a break, Venerable George.
Yeah, just let's just finish this this a little bit further. Thank you for that. Shanka, what do you think?
I was thinking whether you should take a break, Venerable George.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah, okay. Well, maybe you're. I hope it's not that you all need a cup of tea, but anyway, let's just finish that. So that's from Jimpa's translation. Then the next paragraph, we'll just read this next paragraph. The conditions that impair mental cognition. So those are conditions that generally affect the sense powers, the sense bases, right? So you see things distorted in a certain way, or you hear things in a distorted way, like echoes and so forth. The conditions that impair mental cognition include, in addition to such spells and relevant substances that the magician would use, they include distorted philosophical views. Oh boy. Conditions that impair mental cognition. So that which impairs you from realizing what is true include distorted philosophical views, false arguments, impairment by sleep, which if you've ever not gotten enough sleep, you'll know what that means, and so on. Since sleep is described here as a factor that impairs our mental faculty from among the six senses, those who claim that the master Chandrakirti accepts sensory perceptions to be present in sleep represent a great distortion. Okay, I'll just read how Jeffrey translates that. Impairment to the mental sense power, impairments to the mental sense power are those mantras, medicines, and so forth, as well as wrong tenets. Jeffrey translates quasi-reasons, which is the Tibetan Tensik Tarnang. How have we translated Tarnang before?
Facsimiles of reason.
Facsimiles, yeah, I like that. So appearing like, Tarnang. Nang means appearing, tar means like. So, when you make a facsimile of something, a fax, or nowadays a photocopy, you're getting a facsimile of the original. It's not the original one, but it looks like, it appears like the original, right? So I like that also, facsimiles of a correct reasoning, rather than saying, what did he say here? The impairment.
Called it quasi-reason.
Quasi-reasoning, yeah. Jeffrey has translated in other texts as facsimiles of reasoning. They should be understood. So sleep, and as well as wrong tenets, quasi-reasons, sleep, and so forth. Since Chandrakirti says that sleep impairs the mind, here it means the mental consciousness, because that word is yid, which refers, yi in Tibetan, which refers to the mental consciousness. Since Chandrakirti says that sleep impairs the mind from amongst the six sense powers, so that implies that it doesn't impair the other sense powers, right? Do you catch the difference there? More clear, I think, in Jeffrey's. Chandrakirti says that sleep impairs the mind from among the six sense powers. Implication is that sleep doesn't impair the eye sense power, ear sense power, nose sense power. It does, in a sense, because they withdraw, but they're not impaired because they're not usable at that time. It is hugely wrong to explain that this master asserts that sense consciousnesses exist in dream. So they're already absorbed. So what you experience in dreams, if you see something, if you see a handsome man or beautiful woman, or you imagine tasting. Does anyone have dreams of tasting things sometime? No? Richard, no? Lama Yeshe used to say that he would, when the monks at Sarah, they had very little money, and they didn't even have sampa to eat. They would put some sand in what little sampa they had to make it last longer. He would dream at night of eating butter, and he would wake up very refreshed, having tasted that and so forth. So there are various experiences in dreams. You can imagine hearing something in your dream, but that is not based on your sense power. So that's what's being said here. It's what did we say? It is hugely wrong to explain that this master asserts that sense consciousnesses exist in dreams. Okay, let's take a little break. If you need to make a pit stop, as I don't know if women say that. That's more man, right? If you have to go to the toilet, if you want to make a cup of tea or have another energy drink like John is doing there. If you'd like to stay on, please do. I'm listening. I find the discussions immensely valuable. So we'll just take a couple-minute break. Okay, so we're back again. So what do you think? Making sense? KT, what do you think?
On the break, I was just thinking about like cult-like brainwashing, and that would be like an impaired mental cognition, but you just don't realize it because you've been brainwashed.
Imbibing false tenets in someone, right? Yeah, or indoctrination at the I hope I don't get in trouble in the Moonies or one of these sects, you know, that convince you of something like that. One could argue the Buddhists are doing the same thing, but that's for you to decide. Okay, Louise, are you okay? Making sense? Everything okay?
That's why I'm always pushing back against faith claims.
Yeah, yeah. Jennifer, you any thoughts?
I just had a question going back to the conditions that impair mental cognition and the distorted philosophical views. So does that relate to, I think there are two types of wrong sort of views or perception. One is innate and one is acquired. Right. Does this category refer to the intellectually acquired ones through other religions, etc.?
Yes, exactly. Good observation. In fact, it's coming up in the coming paragraphs. So let's continue on. So we're all here. So that being so, Jimpa says, just after Jimpa had said, Master Chandrakirti, those who claim that the Master Chandrakirti accepts sensory perceptions to be present in sleep represent a great distortion. They're wrong. He doesn't say that the senses are present in sleep. You can have the appearance to your mental consciousness of those senses, but the senses do not exist. That being so, the causes of impairment in the particular context here should not be held to be the impairment caused by the contamination of ignorance. So when you consider things to be wrong in the world, you know, like a blue snow mountain or a white wall appearing yellow or other kinds of distortions, those impairments should not be thought to be caused by the contamination of ignorance, such as the two forms of grasping at self-existence. Two forms of grasping at self-existence means the grasping at self-existence of persons and the self-existence of phenomena, of course, ingrained in us since beginningless time. Or as Jeffrey says, thus the impairment of being polluted by the ignorance consisting of the two apprehensions of self of persons and phenomena, which have operated beginninglessly and so forth, is not held to be a cause of impairment in this context. Jimpa says, here, as explained above, the causes of impairment are the conditions of illusion that impair our senses temporarily, or as Jeffrey translates that phrase, rather the superficial causes of mistake that impair our sense powers explained above in this context are held to be the causes of impairment. Okay. Then Jimpa's translation continues, and the distinction drawn here, how conventional facts apprehended by the unimpaired six consciousnesses are true or veridical, and how those that are contrary are distorted. Contrary means that are impaired, whose sense faculties are impaired, those objects are distorted, or those consciousnesses are distorted. the distinction remains solely within the context of the world's perspective. Right? The analysis is on the basis of whether something perceived to exist within such a perspective is invalidated by everyday cognitions of the world. The analysis is on the basis of whether something perceived to exist within such a worldly perspective is invalidated by everyday cognitions of the world. From the perspective of the Aryas, superior beings, those who've realized emptiness, however, no such distinction between veridical and distorted conventional truths can be made. So generally, Prasangika doesn't accept the division into right and wrong conventional truths. They're all wrong. They're all distorted because they appear to be inherently existent, whereas they're not. So from the perspective of the Arya beings, maybe even people who've had, on the path of preparation, who have deep insight into emptiness, haven't realized it directly yet. But from the perspective of the Aryas, however, no such distinction between true and distorted conventional truths can be made. That's been said 3 or 4 times in different ways. Does that make sense? Sinking in? Louise, are you okay with that? Yeah, okay. Just as reflections and the like do not exist in reality as they appear. So reflections do exist, but they don't exist as they appear. They appear to be, say, real faces, reflection of a real face, or mirage appears to be real water, just as reflections and the like do not exist in reality as they appear. Blue and so on, perceived by those who possess ignorance, do not exist. You could say blue does not exist. Blue and so on do not exist by virtue of their intrinsic existence as they are perceived to exist. So in the same way that reflections and so forth, mirages don't exist in reality as they appear, any kind of phenomena, sprouts, trees, the color blue and so forth, that are perceived by those who possess ignorance, which means even Aryas have ignorance until the 8th bhumi, right? Just as reflections and the like, just as reflections and the like do not exist in reality as they appear, blue and so on, perceived by those who possess ignorance, do not exist by virtue of their intrinsic characteristics as they are perceived to. So that leaves a little bit of sliver of doubt when it says those who possess ignorance. So an 8th, 9th, and 10th level bodhisattva, Paul, do they possess ignorance? Pure bhumi bodhisattvas?
They possess ignorance. They do not possess afflicted ignorance. They the question is, I mean, it's they have the obstructions to omniscience. I'm just remembering if you call that ignorance or not.
Yeah. So generally they don't have ignorance. So he says here, just as reflections and so on do not exist in reality as they appear, just like that, blue and so on means anything else, sprouts and flowers and trees and fences, perceived by those who possess ignorance, do not exist by the virtue of their intrinsic characteristics as they are perceived to. So even the bodhisattvas on the 8th, 9th, and 10th bhumis do not have ignorance generally, as it's generally described. They have eliminated the obstructions to liberation, which are ignorance and grasping to the self and so forth, from the root. They're essentially arias, but things still, and also Hinayana arias have no longer that kind of ignorance, but they still perceive, these things still are perceived as being truly existent. Let me see how Jeffrey translates that here. Conventional objects are not posited as the two, real and unreal, in relation to superiors, in relation to Arya beings. Conventional objects, we don't have that division of saying that there are real and unreal conventional things in relation to superiors, because just as reflections and so on, so forth, do not exist as objects in accordance to how they appear, just like that, so although blue and so forth appear to be established by way of their own character to those who have ignorance, they do not exist as objects in accordance to how they appear. They appear to be established by way of their own character to those who have ignorance.
Yeah, but pure ground bodhisattvas would still have these appearances.
Right, that's my doubt here. So I'm not sure whether Lama Tsongkhapa is, as Paul had suggested, taking the category of ignorance to include obstructions to omniscience there or not, because generally they would still have, unless this is talking about something different. So although blue and so forth appear to be established by way of their own characteristic to those who have ignorance, I would say to those who are not a Buddha or who are not in meditative equipoise on emptiness, they do not exist as objects in accordance to how they appear. Jeffrey continues, therefore, these two consciousnesses, that is, a consciousness of a reflection and a consciousness to which blue appears to be established by way of its own character, cannot be divided even in terms of being mistaken or not mistaken, since both are mistaken with respect to their appearing objects. Cyril, what do you think?
Can you repeat the last sentence, please?
Yes, I can. I'm reading from Jeffrey Hopkins' translation here of this section. Therefore, the two consciousnesses, in this context, what he means is the consciousness of a reflection and the consciousness to which blue appears to be established by way of its own character. Those two consciousnesses cannot be divided even in terms of being mistaken or not mistaken, that the consciousness of a reflection, generally that would be considered to be mistaken, and the consciousness to which blue appears to be truly established or, intrinsically existent. That's the way that it appears.
Yes, but I don't understand the consciousness of a reflection. Why would it be mistaken?
Because it's mistaken in that what appears to that consciousness of a reflection, the I consciousness, let's say, what appears is a face. Let's say if you stand in front of it, if you're shaving or putting on your makeup, or doing both, it appears there's a face in the mirror. We've grown up since we were kids. We know that's not a real face, but it appears to be a face. reflections appear to be a face, or a mirage does appear, but it appears to be water. You can't say the mirage doesn't appear, but it
Yes,
appears to be water, which is not the case. So that
yes,
is a
but
mistaken
yes,
cognition.
yes, I understand this. But if you see, for example, the mirage as a mirage, nevertheless, likewise for a dream, it's better a good dream than a nightmare.
I'm not quite sure.
Isn't it? Isn't
The
it?
reflection is a reflection. Yeah, that's the
Yes.
case. But here it says the consciousnesses, for instance, the consciousness of a reflection and the consciousness which perceives blue as inherently existent. They appear to be they cannot be divided even in terms of being mistaken or not mistaken, since both are mistaken with respect to their appearing objects. They're both mistaken with respect to their appearing objects. The ordinary consciousness that we all have, even with clear senses of seeing trees, the color blue, anything, that is mistaken with respect to its appearing objects because its appearing object appears to be inherently existent. From the Prasangika point of view, all phenomena appear to the senses as inherently existent. Okay, Cyril, bear with us. Let's just go a little bit further.
Yes, I don't really understand this. Maybe if it is possible, could I ask another question, please?
Okay.
Yes, I would like to know, for example, if it is possible to change past events.
To change
For
past
example,
events.
but yes, I think it is not, of course. For example, if someone has done something, any action,
If you failed
it is
your
impossible
exam,
to remove it. Sorry?
I was joking. I said, if you failed your exam, you want to know if you could change the past.
Yes, of course not. Yeah, of course not. Yes, no.
So what's your question? You just
my
wanted
question
to have that verified.
My question is, so if you cannot change past events,
right?
What is the point to try to change it?
What do you mean? What is the point of trying to change it?
But if it is not possible, if the assumption is that it is impossible to change action which has been done,
yeah,
the conclusion is that it is useless to try to do this, isn't it?
Yes. Then
so
what fault is there in
so
that?
So no, sorry.
No, continue.
Right. So if it is useless to try to change something that has occurred because you cannot undo it,
right?
So why lose so much time trying to do something which is impossible?
But Cyril, why do you where does it say, or why do you think that the text is saying anything about trying to change past events?
No, I don't know if the text is dealing with this, but it's an additional question.
Okay, no, yeah. So no, you can't change past events. In the English vernacular, you say there's no need, no sense of crying over spilled milk. You know, it's already spilled. You know, what's done is done. You can't change that. You can just try to change the future, consequences of that by various things. So let's continue on here. Okay, so Jimpa said, just as reflections and the like do not exist in reality as they appear, blue and so on, perceived by those who possess ignorance, do not exist by virtue of their intrinsic characteristics as they are perceived to be. Thus, no distinction can be made between these two types of cognitions with respect to whether or not they are mistaken. They're both mistaken. Conventional all conventional consciousnesses are mistaken with respect to their appearing objects. So then a qualm comes up, or as Jeffrey says, objection here, Jempa says question. Now, with respect to such instances, the perception of false objects due to one's own sense organs being impaired by immediate or temporary conditions, perception of people and so on in a dream due to impairment of mental consciousness by conditions such as sleep, perception of magical horses and elephants and mirages grasped as perception of magical horses and elephants, one category, and mirages grasped as water that appear to be water and that you believe to be water and so on, that occur in waking states. It may well be true that even ordinary worldly cognition can realize such perceptions are distorted, right? Even ordinary worldly cognition can realize such perceptions are distorted. However, this objection or question is, what is apprehended falsely by the mind impaired by inferior philosophical tenets, getting back to Jennifer's question earlier, what is apprehended falsely by the mind impaired by inferior philosophical tenets cannot be cognized as distorted by ordinary worldly cognition, this question thinks, supposes. How then are such things posited as distorted solely from the perspective of the world? Does that question make sense? Did you get that, Jennifer? Okay. So here we're going to get into, like, say, the Samkhya. The reply is the impairment here in the context of examining whether a perception is impaired or not is not the impairment from grasping at things distortedly due to our innate ignorance. In any case, the postulations of inferior philosophical tenets, they're what they posit, that refers to notions such as a primal substance, like when we talked about the Samkhya, and so on, which are conceived falsely because one's mind has been conditioned by philosophical views. Or, say, for instance, the belief in a permanent, partless, and independent person. Similar. True, ordinary worldly cognitions would not realize that such notions are distorted. Nevertheless, if the valid conventional cognitions of those whose minds may have not been directly informed by an understanding of suchness, realize they are distorted, this constitutes their being realized as false by worldly cognition. Whoa. What does that say? So Jeffrey's translation of that section says, here the impairment that is analyzed as to whether or not there is impairment is not taken to be impairment by innate erroneous apprehension. Therefore, those that are imputed by bad tenets and are realized to be wrong by a worldly consciousness do not include the inherent existence that is innately misapprehended, but are the principle, what we say, soul what is the Sanskrit? I can't remember.
Atman?
Says here, pradhana.
Pradhana and Anjana
And Prakriti is the other one.
Prakriti, yeah, Pradhana and Prakriti, both translated used in certain circumstances to be synonymous, although slightly different if you go into their philosophy.
Maybe,
Apparently,
maybe the Brahman as well. I don't. Anyway, it doesn't matter.
okay, yeah. So, so we're not talking about the. We're talking about those that are imputed by bad tenets and are realized to be wrong by a worldly consciousness, do not include the inherent existence that is innately misapprehended. That's not the kind of ignorance, what do we call it here? The impairment, that ignorance that grasps the true existence. That's not what's being talked about here. But the principle and so forth, which are wrongly imputed only by those whose awarenesses have been affected by tenets, although those are not realized to be erroneous by an ordinary worldly awareness. So what does that mean? So the primal principle, the fundamental principle of Samkhya or some other Vedic ideas that the person is permanent, partless, and independent. Those are all things that are held by the mind. The mind is impaired by having heard those bad tenets and been habituated to them, right? Therefore, those that are imputed by bad tenets and are realized to be does not include inherent existence, but are the principle and so forth, which are wrongly imputed only by those whose awarenesses have been affected by tenets. Although those are not realized to be erroneous by an ordinary worldly awareness, they are realized to be so, to be erroneous, by conventional valid cognition that is not directed towards suchness. Because you can actually prove conventionally with valid cognition that these principles and so forth that are held wrong tenets are wrong. They are realized to be erroneous by conventional valid cognition, but not one that's trying to analyze suchness or emptiness, in which case they are realized to be wrong by a worldly consciousness. So although they're not realized to be wrong by an ordinary worldly awareness, you just hear about it, you say, oh yeah, that makes sense, I have to believe that, the Samkhya said that. But if you were to apply logic and so forth, and analyze those principles without delving into emptiness at all, you can show that they're not true on the conventional level. That's what's being said here. They have no existence even on the conventional level.
Can I ask just one clarification?
Yeah.
Venerable George, is he also saying ordinary worldly awareness, which is the kind that could verify the sky is not actually yellow? That's a ordinary worldly awareness, but isn't something that requires actually any analysis. He's saying that the ordinary worldly awareness would engage in conventional, in an analytic process whereby this belief in soul can be refuted. And that's a conventional valid cognition, not requiring
analysis of emptiness.
Analysis of emptiness, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the case. So the last sentence there, nonetheless, I'm reading Jimpa, nonetheless, if the valid conventional cognitions of those whose minds may not have been directly informed by an understanding of suchness, realize they are distorted. This constitutes their being realized by false by worldly cognition. So his note there, Chimpa's note there, 427, says Tsongkhapa is saying that philosophical views such as Samkhya's primal substance and the Vaisheshikas in eternal invisible atoms and so forth can be refuted without realizing suchness as emptiness in Madhyamaka terms. Even non-Madhyamikas can demonstrate that these assertions are false. Okay, a lot of complicated words. Sean, what do you think?
I was thinking about a different avenue though, because like back in the day when people thought the earth was flat, the convention of the world was that the earth was flat. And then you had these, like Copernicus and Galileo come along and challenge the convention of the world. But most people still believed the world was flat.
Right.
It took this
So,
major change.
right. It was only extreme circumstances. If you got a high enough tower where you could see, I don't know, could you see at that time, could you build something you could see the curvature?
I think they were watching how the boats would go over the horizon.
Right. So there were so by using logic, to ordinary appearances, if you just look, it looks like the world is flat. Come on, it's flat. Good.
But a lot of our conventions are based on consensus and not necessarily on valid so what is considered a valid cognition?
Flat. Right. Exactly.
But that's not what's meant here, right? Consensus isn't the criteria for validity. It's whether it can be validated by an unimpaired consciousness that's not engaging in ultimate analysis.
Well,
which is a different thing.
But sometimes what I'm saying is like the consensus view of the world is wrong.
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying. The consensus view has nothing to do with conventional valid cognition.
The word that's getting translated pretty consistently as conventional often is this, I think, translating Sanskrit word vyavahara. That's what tanye means in Tibetan. And that word literally means transactional. I don't know if that's helpful at all, but it's more it's less like convention in terms of what everybody believes so much as it has to work as well. So there has to be like, I don't know.
So that's one of the three meanings of samvritis when we talk about samvriti sattva. How do you pronounce it again?
Vyavahara.
Vyavahara. I didn't pronounce it right anyway. Right. So let's just continue a little bit more. One might ask, no. So that was up to the footnote 427. As for other categories, such as reference conceived by the two types of grasping at self-existence, these belong to the class of what are referred to as objects apprehended by unimpaired senses. Such things are thus true or veridical or true from the perspective of ordinary worldly understanding. Nonetheless, they have no existence even on the conventional level. Any referent, any object, that is taken as your object of perception, for other categories, such as the reference conceived by the two types of grasping at self-existence. So that's going to be done only by the mental consciousness, right? Not by the senses. Because the senses don't have any grasping to true existence. Things appear to be truly existent, inherently existent, but the eyes, the ears, and nose, and so forth don't grasp them to be truly existent. So as for other categories, such as objects, you could say, conceived by the two types of grasping at self-existence, these belong to a class of what are referred to as, quote, objects apprehended by unimpaired senses. Why? You have to think about. Such things are thus true from the perspective of ordinary worldly understanding. You know, the person, anything that the mind perceives, anything that the senses perceive and the mind thinks about grasping at it as truly existent, you know, the beautiful food, the delicious food, the beautiful people, such things are thus true from the perspective of ordinary worldly understanding, but they have no existence on the conventional level. They don't exist in the conventional level. What doesn't exist in the conventional level? The delicious food and the beautiful cars? No,
Truly existing ones.
Presumably they're meaning intrinsically or inherently existing, right?
the
George?
ones that the inherently existing delicious food, inherently existing beautiful car or person or something, they don't exist at all on the conventional level. Okay, so gone over. I've prepared from Guy Newland's book, The Two Truths, a PDF that I think Jeffrey was referring to in a note that's coming up in a subsequent lesson. So you might like to take a look at that. Doris, have you it's posted up in the chat. It says, what's the title of the PDF? What are unreal conventionalities, or what's the title of the PDF so they can find it if it's not clear to them?
Yes, that's the title that I have.
What are unreal conventionalities? So we'll talk about that when we come back in September. You've got some homework. Try to figure out what's going on. It sounds very complicated, and on one level, it's not so complicated. But if you get into discussing it on a much deeper level, there are all sorts of caveats, and it can be quite complicated. Guy Newland had studied, and John Paul could correct me more, studied with Jeffrey at University of Virginia and was privy to visiting lectures where he could go into these details of Jamyang Shepa's compositions, and also traveled to India to study with them. So a lot of that material you won't find in other books. So that's a very good resource, Guy Newland's The Two Truths, if you get a chance to study that. So before we go, how are we doing? We're missing Stephen today. I think he's still with his mom, who is I'm gonna have to call back the Pulmonary Institute. They're just calling me. And also Mikhail's mom, who just passed away. We'll think of them both in our dedications. So any final thoughts or questions before we end? Okay. So Shanka, if you'd like to put up the dedication prayers. Due to these virtues, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha. Literally means, may I quickly become a Guru Buddha and lead all migrators without leaving one behind, even the enemies, may I lead them all into that enlightened state. And implicitly here, although this is a prayer, we can think of it as a dedication. Due to these virtues, may the supreme precious jewel, bodhicitta, that has not arisen, arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase evermore. And in terms of the swift return of Lama Zopa Rinpoche's reincarnation, peerless teacher and assembly of children of the victorious ones, Shravakas, Pratika Buddhas, victorious Losang father and sons, together with your lineage, all the objects of refuge of the infinite realms, please bestow upon us now the virtue and goodness to accomplish this prayer. Give us that impetus that this prayer might be accomplished. In upholding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings through explanation and practice, you, Lama Zopa, wore the armor of patience that is never discouraged, like your class members in this class, not being discouraged by the difficult subject. Incomparable Venerable Guru, to you I make request, sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, while striving exclusively for the welfare of the conqueror's teachings and for mother living beings, mother migrating beings, you suddenly departed to peace. At this I lost hope. Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truth of the blessings of the ocean of the three jewels, or the oceanic blessings of the three jewels, and the great waves of bodhicitta of the bodhisattvas, by the truth, that means that we're calling on the power of the truth, that the blessings of the three jewels is true, and that the bodhicitta of the bodhisattvas is true. Due to those truths, may the smile of a new reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for us fortunate disciples. And finally, you who are my eyes to view all the infinite scriptures, supreme gateways for the fortunate ones traveling to liberation, engaging with skillful means, moved by mercy, illuminating spiritual friends. Implication here in this context, please live long and stable lives. And in thinking of Stephen's mom, who is ill, and I think with cancer, and Mikhail's mom, who just passed away, thinking when they do pass away, in the case of Stephen's mom, and in the case of Mikhail's mom, may they quickly find a perfect human rebirth, an auspicious moment due to our merits. Generally, merits can't ripen on someone else, but in certain circumstances, when one is in the bardo, virtuous actions that you do for them, if you have a karmic connection with them, can influence their rebirth within the bardo. When you can be reborn within the bardo up to 7 times, up to 49 days. So due to that, these virtues, may they quickly find a life of leisure and endowment, and encounter perfect Mahayana gurus, be led through the stages of the path to enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. So thank you for your courage and good spirits and patience. I look forward to seeing you in September.
When are we meeting again in September?
Come again?
When are we meeting again in September?
What is it? September 7th?
7th. Okay, thank you.
I wasn't sure. Someone said 7th. Yeah. So you have 5 weeks to experience the the summer dogs. What is it? The dogs of summer? I can't remember. What is
Dog
it?
days.
Dog days of summer.
Summer doldrums.
Fortunately, Paul and Jennifer are not in Italy right now, where it's usually hotter. But stay cool. Try to catch up in some cases. Read ahead. Study these various materials that we have, and look forward to seeing you then. Take care.
Thank you so much,
Thank you
Venerable
so
George.
much.
We
Thank
look
you,
forward to
Venerable
seeing you
George.
too.
Thanks for your courage.
Thank you, Venerable George. Thank you for your patience.
Everybody.
Thank you.
To everyone
Thank you,
else.
everybody.
See you soon.
Everybody.
See you in 5 weeks.
See you, Doris. Go shave.